Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today and being here. Welcome to Diversifying the Future, Meaningful Ways to Advance Diversity and Inclusion as a Tech Leader, the last of our Disrupt and Diversify series to kick off the new year. My name is Emma Jordan, and I'm a marketing manager at staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, the founder and creator of Tech in Motion events. For those of you who might be new here, Tech in Motion is a community-driven event series with the goal to bring together the tech community to share ideas, inspire one another, and innovate together. We aspire to cover a range of tech's most pressing topics, and today we're so excited to be talking about one that should be at the forefront of everyone's minds. In today's global market, a strong, talented, and diverse workforce is a necessity. Not only are diversity, equity, and inclusion extremely important pillars for ensuring a collaborative, supportive, and successful work culture, but 67% of candidates now actively seek out a company for its diverse practices specifically. So, that being said, what meaningful changes can tech leaders make right now to ensure employees and potential tech talent can be themselves and thrive in 2021? Today, we're so honored to be able to hear from our passionate and expert panelists as they answer this question and provide some insight into this complicated topic. If you have any questions that come up during the event, please be sure to submit them so that they can be answered during our Q&A session at the end. So now let's go ahead and get started. I would love to kick off and introduce you to our incredible host, Shelton Banks. Every day, Shelton tackles one of the biggest challenges of today head on, closing the diversity gap. Shelton is particularly focused on improving DEI in the tech sector and encourages inclusion regardless of age, gender, color, abilities, disabilities, or healthcare needs. Shelton has been the CEO of Rework Training since 2018, a national diverse talent development network that works within the communities it serves to create space in tech for untapped potential. As the leader of this rapidly growing and unique nonprofit, Shelton is dedicated to changing hiring trends for communities that have been overlooked in order to make the tech industry as diverse as the Chicago neighborhood he comes from. Now, Shelton, you can take it from here.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk to our panelists today. But before I introduce the panelists, let's talk a little bit about the state of diversity as it stands, particularly in the tech industry. So it's been about 56 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned employers and everyone else from discriminating based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And so since 1964, what do you think? Are workplaces more equal in 2021 than they were back in 1964? Well, judging on employment statistics, the gap is kind of closing, but it definitely hasn't disappeared. Let's take a closer look. Last year, the unemployment rate fell for Black employees to 5.5%, which is the lowest it's ever been since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started recording back in 1970. Unemployment amongst Latinx workers also dropped 4.2%, which is a record low. But since 1970, unemployment among minorities has remained constantly higher than unemployment rates among white workers, and minority workers also lag behind when it comes to their peers when it comes to earning. Not only that, they're overrepresented chronically in underpaid industries like agriculture, domestic and service labor work, and overlooked in most of the highest paying industries like the tech industry. And Silicon Valley isn't helping it. 3% of VCs were Black last year in 2018 reports show. 1% of VCs were Hispanic, 18% of VCs were women. 58% of VCs were white men, 40% of VCs went to Stanford or Harvard. So we can see that there's a stubborn pattern that still exists. And we're here to shake it up and change things. And so I'm excited to talk to our panelists today. Our first panelist, Melinda Scott. She's an unrepentant nerd who has dedicated her career to agility and quality in software as defined not only by defects, but by usability and usefulness. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion in all things, including STEM, media, and systematic policies. I'm excited to have Melinda Scott on the panel, as well as Cedric Abali. Cedric is an analytics implementation consultant with experience in merchandising and customer analytics. He adds value by driving strategic change in the areas of promotion and assortment optimization, loyalty, segmentation, and advanced analytics. He is an ERG leader with Nielsen and is passionate about development and advancement of Black and African American associates. Cedric and Melinda, welcome.
Thanks so much for having us, Shelton.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. Well, let's dive right in. So I'm a fan of a quote by Martin Luther King. He asked the question, do you want to be a thermostat or a thermometer? Are you just about telling the temperature, or are you about changing the temperature? So we're going to do a little bit of both today. So when it comes to strategies around attracting, hiring, and retaining diverse talent, those are three big buckets. Let's break it up. How do we attract diverse talent?
Well, I'll start. The best way, diversity begets diversity. So if you are creating an environment within your organization that people want to be in and want to stay in, then I believe that diversity will grow in some ways organically. There's also a big piece on where we're looking and who we're talking to. You mentioned, many people come from universities like Stanford and Harvard. We need to be looking in state colleges, community colleges, boot camps, returnships. There's so many opportunities for us to get to know a diverse set of people with brilliant minds that we don't always tap into effectively.
I agree, Melinda, and I'm a big believer in the fact that retention is far more important than attraction. Your current associates are your biggest advocates, so your focus should first be on retaining those associates, creating an environment where they can feel welcome, be themselves. And then they'll do part of the job of the attraction for you, because they'll tell their friends about the workplace. They'll tell their friends about how they feel part of that community. So retention first, and then attraction will follow. And we can talk about retention strategies specifically if we want to do that.
Yeah, let's dive into it. So, you mentioned retention first. What does that look like?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think there are a few key things that make retention successful. First of all, the right listening structures. Listening structures in this case are listening and activation structures. Listening structures in this case like ERGs and mentorship programs and things of that sort. The goal is to understand what these associates want and need, give them a space to be celebrated. And also the second thing is executive accountability. D&I is not a goal for HR. D&I is not a goal for just the D&I team. It's an organizational imperative. So having executives attached to driving D&I, adding incentives to driving D&I will make sure that D&I goals are hit within the organization. And finally, measurement. The organization needs to know where they are, where they're going, and how they are performing with regards to getting there.
Yeah, you mentioned incentivizing, right? Well, you mentioned like this being active executive buy-in. What does that look like though? Like, right? Because I hear it often, like executive buy-in. We need executive buy-in. It has to start at the top, right? And it seems like it's relatively easy to just check a box and say like, oh, I'm bought in. Like, what does that actually mean?
You want to go, Melinda?
Yeah, well, I was thinking you have some really great examples of executives who are actively involved in some of those structures that Cedric mentioned, things like mentorship, sponsorship, being actively involved in the employee resource groups, actively involved in events and discussions. One thing that I have really enjoyed seeing over the past year plus at my organization is a vulnerability and an openness to have crucial conversations with our executives who aren't backing away from those conversations. And that's when I feel like that's what that looks like. That looks like buy-in to me, when they're willing to come to those spaces and have, difficult conversations and be self-reflective and commit to making changes in the organization. I think that's what that looks like. That's when you have it.
Yeah, I love that difficult conversation, knowing that it's not going to be easy. So Melinda, you mentioned a couple of things as far as it comes to attracting in hiring. You mentioned colleges, nonprofits, and boot camps. You also mentioned returnships. Let's start with returnships. What is a returnship?
Yeah, a returnship is something for people who have been in a workforce. It isn't necessarily that they were in tech at one point. They may have been in a completely different industry, but for whatever life reason, they have taken a break. They have stepped away from tech, or they have stepped away from industry, spent some time maybe focused on themselves, maybe focused on health, maybe focused on family, but now they're re-entering the workforce. And what we know is that tech is fast, and we know that industry is fast, and we know that business is fast. And so there are organizations that are creating opportunities for those people to brush up on the skills that they already have, you know, the very valuable things that they can bring to industry and to our companies, but also help catch them up on what has changed and what is new. And I think it's an extremely powerful way to bring in people. You know, maybe they don't immediately check the tech boxes of the languages that you want them to know, but you know they can learn, and they've demonstrated an ability to be successful in industry before. It's a very exciting thing to me to see those organizations create that opportunity for people to come back. One statistic that always sticks in my mind for women in particular is that approximately 50% of women who go into tech leave within 10 years. And I want them to come back.
That's powerful. That's powerful. You also mentioned boot camps and nonprofits. And I feel like there's an oversight. There's no shortage of nonprofits and boot camps that are out there that are doing coding boot camps and all kinds of boot camps. But there seems to not be helping close the gap when it comes to, like, tech companies aren't hiring from these boot camps and nonprofit organizations that are teaching these metrics. Why not? Like, what's the disconnect?
Yeah, I do think that there is a responsibility for tech companies to be reaching out to some of those boot camps. You're right, there are so many, and I think that's part of what's a little overwhelming about the problem is we can't partner with all of them. We would like to, but that's not, you know, that's a daunting proposition. But being able to work with some and help them understand what we're looking for in our candidates, you know, it's one thing to teach Python. That's fantastic. That's a good start, but it doesn't necessarily teach people how to learn tech. It doesn't necessarily teach people the, you know, computer science basics that we need them to understand so that we know they can pick up something else. Especially in my industry of consulting, it's unlikely that you're going to be writing the same language 3 weeks from now, right? Everything changes so quickly that what's important to us is that demonstration of learning. And so we need to be spending our times with those organizations and boot camps and helping them understand what we're looking for. We're not experts in curriculum. We're not necessarily experts in teaching, but we can at the very least help close the gap between what they're teaching and what we need. And that's the thing that I do think that tech companies as a whole and as an industry needs to be spending more time doing.
Helping to close the gap on what needs to be taught. Love that. Cedric, you mentioned that that the leadership teams need to listen. It's commitment, right? And so I pulled us a stat around employee referrals and advocates of color referring friends, and it's relatively low. So minority employee referrals are less than 10%. Is it safe to say that employees need to feel safe to refer people that look like them to their company? Is that a safe assumption?
Absolutely. Something interesting I can say is we did a survey recently within our ERG, and what we found was the issue wasn't necessarily the fact that they are not safe in the organization and they don't want to refer their friends. The issue was a lot of them weren't aware of the referral program and the process for it. So there is a gap there to educating folks on how to refer, educating folks on how to get their friends in the organization. But absolutely, to your point, associates need to feel safe in an organization to get their friends in. And that executive accountability that we mentioned is absolutely important for that, because as Melinda mentioned, within my organization, executives are assigned to ERGs, and not just assigned, you assign an executive that has no affinity or no direct affinity to that ERG. So you have males as the executive sponsors of the Women in Nielsen. You have white people as the executive sponsors of the Hispanic or Black or African American ERGs. That does two things. First of all, it makes this executive more adept at managing a diverse workforce, but at the same time, it gives these ERGs a voice in the executive room. So they're fighting for their causes, and then there's obviously the incentives attached to allowing these executives to push that agenda. So making executives responsible for driving this means that your direct manager is also responsible for driving it down the line. And then employees feel safer, and then they can refer their friends. So it's sort of an overarching strategy.
Love that. How important that the safety, the psychological safety is such an important topic as we think about being your whole self and being inclusive at work. So let's talk about practices. So how do we put, so let's just say like, all right, we fixed the pipeline. We got this pipeline issue. We start working with other nonprofits. We start going to colleges, boot camps. We start contributing and helping those organizations get to the level where we need them to be at. So now we're attracting them. How do we get them in and keep them? So what are some practices? How do we create this equitable and inclusive environment?
I really like, Cedric, what you said a moment ago about, having executives of one demographic be integrated into resource groups of other demographics. And I love the idea, allyship is something that every leader I know wants to be part of. Every leader I know wants to be an ally. They want to be part of that sense of psychological safety and ambient belonging for all people. But it's a learned skill. It's not something that we can just say, cool, just be an ally, right?
Yeah.
I think one of those practices is really around that education and that communication on what it means to be an ally and what it means to create those safe spaces for people of backgrounds that are very different from your own.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The education piece is huge because it helps close the gap, the knowledge gap on what it means to be a diverse associate. But there are simple things certain organizations are doing, which we don't generally consider as practices that drive diversity, but they are. Simple things like simply acknowledging and celebrating these diverse groups. Organizations doing activities to celebrate Black History Month. That is a practice that celebrates those associates within the organization. International Women's Day, Pride events, those kind of activities. But organizations taking that extra step, like for example, having a prayer room for folks in the Muslim faith to observe their religious practices. Those are things you can do. Those are practices you can have in your organization that sort of celebrate that diversity. And something we don't often talk about is a strong anti-discrimination policy. Is something that needs to be clear across the organization, because if we're trying to create a culture of inclusion and diversity, we have to set the standards of what needs to be done if someone were to break those rules. So a strong anti-discrimination policy and anti-retaliation policy, those are really good practices to have in place as well.
So you mentioned a few things, right? You mentioned like certain days, right? Being able to reflect certain days. You mentioned the anti-discrimination policy, right? So like these steps that employers are taking, let's just say that you're a company that lacks diversity. Are you to just assume? So if I'm starting the company and I'm by myself, I'm a white male, and I should just assume that, look, we need these days in place, we need these ERGs in place, like, because you mentioned a lot, like what?
I think this goes back to the listening piece. You won't want to implement something that associates in the organization don't identify with. So if you have associates who have or who are African American or Black and have an interest in Black History Month, you definitely want to celebrate that. If you have associates who need the space to observe their religious practices, you definitely want to create that space. So it's about listening and understanding who's in your organization and creating specific practices targeted at those people in your organization.
Yeah. And so Nathan, so he said, what about Puerto Ricans? And so Nathan, you're absolutely right. So when we speak of diversity here, we're any overlooked and untapped is what the words that I like to use. Overlooked and untapped group that isn't represented by the minorities, or by the majority, Nathan, which includes Puerto Ricans, 100%.
I want to address that too, just because it happens that just yesterday, There was a really fantastic panel in my organization of a variety of Latinx employees, and several, or at least two of them, were from Puerto Rico, and it was really wonderful to get their perspective. And again, you know, like Cedric, I'm a big fan of listening. I'm a big fan of hearing what it is people need to feel safe, to feel supported. And sometimes that's ERGs and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we want more combined events, but that the investment is there and that we're listening to the people who work for us. I think that's what drives those policies to be.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So to that point, let me ask you this, right? So back in I want to say 2000, early 2000, there was a mantra that was called "Nothing about us without us," with the idea of like you don't make decisions about a group without representation from that group. And so as we relate to listening, you know, how important is it to make sure that we're listening to the right one? How do we balance making sure that we're listening to the right voices, right? Voices that represent each group that is in question, one. And how do we avoid the polarization that one person represents the entire group as relates to making decisions?
Yeah, it always pains me a little when we put the onus on education on the person who is affected by others' behavior, right? That is something that hurts my heart when I say it. There is a fine balance between asking, listening, and expecting people from diverse backgrounds to tell us things, and us not to go out and get the education on our own and understand how we can be a better ally on our own. So, I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. There are going to be populations that you don't necessarily have a large number of people to ask, right? You might not have a large population of people with different physical abilities. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be going out and educating yourself on how we can create a better space so that we can welcome and invite people of that background into our companies. So it's a forever conversation. It's never something that, well, we did a survey once 2 years ago and this is what we heard, so this is just what we're going to do. It needs to be something that you're constantly checking in on and educating ourselves outside of our own company and our own demographics, and you know, helping each other out too. Tech grows together, and tech can influence tech and create a better environment for everyone.
Yeah, completely agree. Would you add, Cedric?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And something to call out, which Melinda mentioned, is it's not something that ends once you create ERGs or you have executives attached to it. It's the journey. And the reality is a lot of the time you will get it wrong, but that is part of the journey. It's about learning and iterating and improving and doing it better every time. So over time, you begin to understand who the right voices are within an organization. You begin to create the right structures so those voices are filtered into the right rooms. So it's about starting and listening and doing something and then improving as you go on.
Yeah, like that. So Melinda, you mentioned like this ongoing education. Both of you all mentioned this ongoing education. And so is it safe to say that it's impossible to be diverse and inclusive professionally and not be diverse and inclusive personally? Is that a safe statement to make?
I mean, I would like that to not be a safe statement to make, but sure. I mean, absolutely, you know, there is recognition, of course, in industry that there's a huge benefit, right, to any company, that inclusion and diversity is necessary for a company to survive. But I think for it to be authentic, and I think for it to be real, then it has to be something that we bake in to ourselves as humans and give our leaders the resources to bake that into themselves as humans. We have so much emphasis at Slalom on you know, who we are as people, who we are as individuals. And I think that keeping the focus on these are people, not demographics, will help transform that idea of like, it's not, again, it's not checking boxes. It's not, well, our numbers are good, so I guess we're diverse and I guess it's safe for people now. It has to be something that we do as people in I think all facets of our lives.
Oh, I love that. These are people, not demographics, right? Which takes the whole monolithic view of siloing somebody to represent their whole race, right? You're working with the person, not the demographic. Love that you said that. And so let's talk about tools and resources, right? So Cedric, you've been saying listening, celebrating, learning, right? Like what tools and resources, like how do you get, you're trying to explore this conversation. I feel like we all need a safe space to be ignorant sometimes, right?
Mhm.
You're trying to you understand the unique perspectives and experiences of others. What do you do?
There are two things I will call out here. Recently, a senior leader said, people are more willing to fight for a cause if they know someone who has experienced that issue. It seems simple. It's basically the idea of we're more willing to fight for our friends or more willing to stand up for our friends. So something as simple as creating deliberate networking opportunities, giving people the opportunity to know somebody who is different from them, creates that allyship, which is huge for diversity. Without allyship, you don't have diversity. But the second thing I'm going to mention is education, and we're back to this as well. It's the right tool for exploring diversity. It's the right path to take. There is book clubs, there is movie clubs. The beauty of having something like a book club is because it gives you, it doesn't put the onus on anybody to come up with content. It gives you pre-recorded or pre-designed content. And what you do is you read through a book, you get together, you discuss the book. And having those book clubs attached with courageous conversations is a very good way of exploring and celebrating these unique perspectives and experiences. I can give you an example. Recently, my organization brought a lot of the D&I leaders together to talk about a book called Better Allies, written by Karen Catlin. And it was an interesting book to talk about, mostly because she explored the idea of what it means to be an ally, but she also explored the idea of what it means to have privilege. And she explored the idea that privilege isn't just being male or white. Privilege is, for someone like me who's an immigrant, speaking English as my first language, that's a privilege. Having a university education, that's a privilege. Being young, that's a privilege. And these privileges influence how I interact with everybody else. So the ability to learn and have those courageous conversations about issues like this is the absolute way to go.
Yeah. What was the name of this book again, Cedric? We got like
Better Allies by Karen Catlin, Catlin.
Yeah. Any other books that you would recommend, either Cedric or Melinda, or anybody in the audience? Feel free to drop in the chat any books that you would recommend. Love to kind of see what books others would recommend. Better Allies, 100%, Michael.
Yeah, I have a lot. I'm trying to think which ones I actually want to throw out. Let me come back to that so that I have a good list, because there's definitely Uncomfortable Conversations is a great book. And I have so many swimming. So let me organize that thought a little bit better. But I love that people are putting things in the chat too. And there's a lot out there that I haven't read. So always looking for more resources.
Awesome. Great. So let's we talked about using tools, right? Cedric gave a lot of good tools to educate oneself. And so how do we measure success around DE and I initiative? So Melinda, you mentioned that these are people, not demographics, right? And so ideally you would want to, how do we measure success? That's the question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. We know that we need to attribute value to our DE&I programs and efforts, but we also want to be careful that it's not just about numbers, right? It's not, well, now we have X percentage of people of this demographic, so we're done, right? I think that for us, retention, kind of full circle back to the topic of retention, if people are staying and referring, that to me is a huge measure of success. People are going to leave, you can't have 0% attrition. And sometimes there's reasons that I'm happy for people, they're moving to another country and we don't happen to have an office there, then we're very supportive of that kind of attrition, but paying attention to why people are leaving your organization, and if there's any sort of signaling around whether or not that psychological safety and that ambient belonging is not happening, is not existing for groups of people. So to me, the value is really around retention and around referral, to what Cedric said. And Sheldon, I think you mentioned it earlier too. The number of people who get referred, right, isn't high. And to me, that says that there's still a lot of uncertainty around, well, I'm okay here for now, but I don't know if I would recommend this to people that I care about, because I don't know if the whole organization or just my office is a safe place, right? And so continuing to ask the question, a lot of people really don't like surveys. Personally, I'm a big fan of them, and I would encourage anyone, if you have an opportunity to give your company feedback, absolutely take it. And one of the questions that is in all of our surveys is, would you recommend Slalom to a friend or family member? And to me, that is an important question, right? Because if you say yes, that to me indicates that sense of belonging and that sense of safety. So to me, the value really is around, are we keeping people, and do they want to bring others into the organization? It's not how many do we have today and how many do we need to have next year to hit our goals. So I know that's a squishy answer, but those things are still measurable. Harder to publish, but still measurable.
Yeah. So let's consolidate this a little bit, right? So that, Cedric, you work for Nielsen, Melinda, you work for Swallow. What if I'm not a big organization like that, right? How do we, is this statement, is everything we just have been talking about, is it not applicable to smaller organizations?
I think it absolutely applies to the small organizations as well. The biggest piece we want to call out is it's about the associates, it's about the individuals, it's about what makes them unique, it's about what makes them different. So understanding those things is the first step to creating an effective D&I strategy. Understanding what they value, understanding what's unique about them is that step. So large or small, taking the step of listening and creating a way to celebrate those different or diverse associates is the absolute way to go.
Yeah, I think on top of that, you don't have to be a large company to have mentorship and sponsorship. You don't have to be a large company to educate around allyship. You don't have to be a large company to have cultural events and recognition of the many awesome holidays and events that happen around the world. There's a lot of little things and little moments that you can create in an organization of any size that shows that commitment and that thought to, hopefully you're an organization that's growing. And if you're baking this into your culture from the very beginning, when you have 12 employees, when you have 1,200 employees, it's just going to be part of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to come back. So Cedric, you keep mentioning celebrating, right? Celebrating. I've heard you mention it a couple of times. And so, what's the balance? I see a question, right? Who should be celebrating? What's the balance of celebration to avoid this idea of companies grandstanding their one Black employee, of like, we got a one Black employee, we did it. Let's use him on every picture that we publish and everything that we post. Like, what's the balance here?
So celebrating in this case doesn't have to be the whole organization doing a Black History Month event. It doesn't have to be a whole organization celebrating International Women's Day. It could be personalized management. And here's what I mean by that. The people most responsible for driving effective D&I or creating that safety is usually the associates, direct managers. So having a manager that recognizes who this person is and treats them uniquely for who they are is a very effective way of celebrating that employee. I can give you an example. And within my team over the past few years, what my boss does when it comes to Christmas is he sends out Christmas cards. And for somebody like me who absolutely loves the movies, he gives me a movie, a gift card to the movies. Recently, I got into photography, and that gift changed into a Best Buy card. That was recognition of the difference or what's unique about me. So that is the personalized management that celebrates who this person is as an individual and helps them understand that, hey, you belong here. Hey, we know who you are. Hey, we like who you are, and we want you here. So that's an example of celebrating associates.
Can we shout out that manager?
He's probably on this call, Carson. Yeah.
Round of applause. Love that. All right, Melinda, what would you add? Anything you would add?
Well, as Cedric was talking, I kind of glanced in the chat and I saw a really great point around, it isn't necessarily that I need people to celebrate a holiday that's important to me or Black History Month or International Women's Day. It really is about that individual leadership that Cedric's talking about and ensuring that everyone has the same level of opportunity, the same resources, the same, access to information that anyone else in the company would have at their level. So I think that, to emphasize the point about having good leaders and spending our time helping our leaders be good leaders is a big piece of that.
Love that. Love that. All right, I got one more. So let's dive into. Do I have any more? So I want to make mention of this. So we talked about metrics, right? We talked about making sure DEI, we set a benchmark of having metrics, and we have a way to measure success. But what if you're in a different part of the world where measuring metrics is it's not looked on with favor? I know Cedric, you're in Canada, and I know that collective metrics isn't something that should do up north. And so, what would you say to those organizations?
Yeah, the challenge is when comparing Canada to the States, legally we're not allowed to collect metrics on representation. However, something Melinda mentioned, which is the surveys. Surveys are a very great way to give feedback to the organization. I can tell you that the survey we did recently within our ERG, one question we asked was intent to stay. Have you considered leaving this organization within the past year? And if you pose that question to a group of associates and you're measuring a diverse group and you see that number is high, that tells you, hey, your diverse associates are looking somewhere else. And then you begin to investigate, why are they looking somewhere else? So asking the right questions as part of your survey, it's a very effective way of collecting data on how your associates feel, and use that survey as a baseline, measure the same questions over time as you begin to implement D&I initiatives, and see if you're growing against those metrics, see if your D&I initiatives are working. The numbers are just the numbers. I mean, they're the easiest thing to work with, but getting to the qualitative data and working with that is actually where you get value.
It all comes back to listening to people and not making assumptions and not, as individual leaders, right? We need to be paying attention to our people, our reports, and understanding how they're feeling from time to time. There's certainly things that I think in the US we don't measure, and people can always say prefer not to answer, right? So I don't think we're necessarily ever going to get a perfect survey that tells us exactly like, oh, this is the group of people who doesn't feel safe and doesn't feel belonging. But if we know our people and we know the people who we work with and who report to us, and also create that trust and safe space with them, hopefully they're giving us that feedback and they feel empowered to give us that feedback, and have that be something that's incorporated into, again, our actions and our day-to-day life. Harder to measure, right? But great impact.
100%. So let me ask you this. We have lots of questions. So I'm loving these questions that are coming through, right? And so, like, as we talk about, diversity and inclusion, we mentioned early on that it's up to leadership, it's executive buy-in, the sponsorship, but like, whose responsibility is it? Just leadership's, senior leadership responsibility to promote diversity and inclusion?
Well, of course not. You're not going to create that sense of safety and belonging and that longevity of employment if your leaders understand it and they're not offering the same level of education and training to everyone, right? Because it's one thing to feel safe with me in my office. It's another thing to feel safe when you step out into the open space. It has to be, again, it has to be part of the culture. It's the responsibility of the CEO. It's the responsibility of the C-suite. It's the responsibility of anyone who has someone who reports to them. And it's the responsibility of anyone who works with another person. It's everyone. It has to be part of the culture of a company. It can't just, again, be a thing that you do. It has to be who you are.
Yeah. So the reason I asked this question because Ron Davis wants to know. He's an engineer leader and he appreciates the value of DEI at a small organization. With that being said, he struggles to find people or even get diverse talent. He's approached HR and recruiting, has been unsuccessful when it comes to approaching HR and recruitment. What does he do? Right. Well, it's like as a manager, I want to promote diversity and inclusion. HR and recruiting, I don't know if they got the message or they may hit me with the we can't find diverse talent. Love that. My favorite, can't find diverse talent line. What do you do in that case?
I don't have a ton of experience trying to find diverse candidates, but here is what I can say. That excuse doesn't work. Organizations who are willing to find diverse candidates are willing to do something different because basically the current methods of sourcing candidates are just not giving you that diverse pool. And Melinda talked about it previously, going to where these diverse candidates are, partnering with these organizations and getting them is the right way or is a way to get to diverse candidates. But beyond that, if you're constrained by finances, I know HR people who have scoured LinkedIn and looked at competitor profiles and tried to poach the diverse candidates. That is a way to find diverse candidates. There are ways of doing the legwork without spending money to find diverse candidates. So yeah, it's that excuse doesn't work from my perspective.
Yeah, I would say we can go to places too. We can attend events. It's not all on of your talent acquisition, your recruiting, your HR organizations to go out and find that. We can go look too. We can go volunteer to speak to a boot camp or volunteer to help teach a class or volunteer to, do a talk at a campus, right? We need to be sort of out there. If the excuse is we can't find diverse candidates, then we need to go look.
As managers, you're saying?
As managers, I mean,
as managers,
as someone who wants to see diversity in my company, yes.
Oh, beautiful. All right, I got lots of questions coming in from the audience. So I'm just gonna do asking from a friend. So, do you have any advice? Me asking for a friend. Any advice on how to best start a formal DE&I committee or council that is both employee led but also has an executive support? How do you get one started?
I can tell.
Patrick, you took a big.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I can say this, and while working for my organization, I was part of a Black technology group outside of my organization, and within that group, I was getting a lot of mentorship that I just wasn't getting within my organization. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to find a way to get those professionals outside my organization into my organization to create that space. So what I did was I talked to a few people, some senior leaders. I tried to find a supporter. I took action, and that action was basically getting my organization to invest in that group outside of my organization. And then I showed value. Basically, my organization invested in a technical conference. HR came back and said, hey, we talked to 300 people. There are approximately 15 people in the pipeline, Black technological professionals who we didn't have access to before. That is value. So find a way to create value for organization, show that value, and then I think it's just going to snowball from there. So get together as a group, do it individually, find support, show value. I think that is the best path to getting your whole organization on board with DNI.
Yeah, well done. I got a whole bunch of questions coming in. So I want to ask this question. Oh, I just lost it. All right, where you at, Kevin? Sorry, Kevin. Okay, I'm gonna come back to you. So how do?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Never mind.
Cause I got a few. Kevin,
Okay.
I missed it earlier, so I got to figure out which one came first. All right. Belonging sentiment. So we talked about diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion. We didn't forget to add belonging, but we just know that this is a very long journey, right? We started with how do you attract and retain diverse talent, and then how do you keep them, and then how do you make them feel like they are belonging? And so key measurements around belonging. So I know, Cedric, you mentioned the survey around asking them, do they plan on leaving anytime?
Intent to stay, yes.
Right. What does that do? Right. What does that do?
Obviously, it's you design the right series of questions to elicit responses around specific ideas. So for the last survey around within our ERG, we ask questions like, do you have friends at work? That seems like a very trivial question, but it basically asks, do you feel like you belong here? You ask questions like, would you refer a friend to work at Nielsen? Have you considered leaving Nielsen in the past 12 months? It's about designing questions to elicit the response, and actually not just giving them the Likert skill to respond, but also giving them opportunity to provide comments. So within those comments, you can actually dig out the sentiments employees feel about the organization. So it's the right design of questions gets you that feedback and qualitative data on belonging.
I want to add something to that, because I think it's really important that people feel safe answering those questions, right? That they know that either it's anonymized or that their very candid, open, honest answers are not going to come back to haunt them. So there has to be, either some really good anonymization and or just people need to see something change as a result of the survey. They need to see not the, well, who said that? But the, oh, this sentiment came up multiple times, so we're going to make a change. We're going to do something different. I think for that sense of safety and that sense of belonging, people absolutely need to feel heard. You can't just ask the question and have them, click a couple of radio buttons and that's it, right? They need to see the results of those surveys. They need to see what an organization is doing with that information. The other thing, Shelton, that you mentioned in the question that I don't think we have spoken enough about is equity, is making sure that everything that we do is equitable, that our salaries are equitable, that our programs are equitable, right? I'm never going to feel safe in an organization if that is in question for me. If I am not sure if my salary is impacted because I'm a woman. I'm never going to feel safe in an organization if I'm not sure if the same programs that are available to my male counterparts are also available to me. So, that equity is safety, equity is belonging, and seeing a company actually act upon the feedback and act upon equity, I think that's the key to creating that environment of safety and belonging. And I think I saw in the chat someone mentioned, like, it's a never-ending journey. You're never done. You're never done. You're never like, well, everyone feels safe now, because your company's going to change and grow, and your whole workforce is probably going to look different 5 years from now than it looks today. So it's not the kind of thing that you ever stop doing.
I'll completely agree. With that said, so I love this question that's coming in. So it says, I'm on a small team of 7. We are in the process of trying to create a DEI committee and trying to think of how to foster DEI education in our team. One of the things we have been thinking about is a book club, so Cedric, like you mentioned. But for events such as these, how can we train to moderate a conversation around potentially difficult topics without introducing any trauma? It's a really good question.
That is an art. And I think that's something that if you don't feel confident you have that in your organization, you need to hire it out, because that has to be done well. those sessions can backfire. Those sessions can have someone walk away from them feeling less safe and less heard if you don't have someone moderating it who is very skilled in reading an audience, in asking questions in a way that doesn't put people on a defense, including every single voice in a conversation like that. I think that's a really critical role if you're going to approach those kinds of conversations. And I think it's worth investing in. And there's people whose whole job is that. That's their whole mission, is to moderate conversations like that. And I think it's worth looking outside your organization to make sure you have it if you're not sure.
I like this next question. As a team member and future leader, what can I do or say to help my fellow team members feel comfortable with their diverse background? I don't want to call people out. I don't want to call out people's differences or make them feel uncomfortable, but I want to make the people accepted and feel comfortable sharing.
I think this goes back to making it a personal conversation. It's about you and the person. Remove the team first of all. Who is this person? What's unique about them? How do we celebrate that? How do we honor that? How do we not do things that go against that? So focus on the individual first. Listen to them. They'll usually tell you in regular conversations, oh, hey, yeah, I can't do anything on Friday evenings because I'm going to the mosque or something like that. These things come up in conversations and you get to learn who people are. So that is absolute basic thing to do. And I recommend going that route first of all.
Yeah, I agree. I like the point about not wanting to other people and not wanting to call out their differences. You know, if you approach a conversation with the things that you have in common first, then I agree with Cedric. They tend to organically, once the trust is built, right? That's job one, right? Is you have to build trust with that person before you can just jump right in. Otherwise, it's going to feel very disingenuous and it's going to feel very intrusive. So build the trust with people in a casual way, and also focusing on the things that you have in common much more than just, you know, asking a bunch of personal questions of a person who doesn't know you very well yet.
Yeah. Love this question, that Cedric's point about the survey asking, do you have friends at work, right? It's a great segue because first, before you start asking those questions, you may want to establish a genuine rapport and friendship with the person.
Yeah, that's a huge predictor on whether or not someone's going to stay, is if they feel like they have confidants and people they trust. So absolutely, I agree, Cedric, that's huge.
Perfect. All right. How can we prevent stereotypes when it comes to conceived notions of a particular ethnic group?
Do you mind repeating that?
Yep. So how can we prevent stereotypes when it comes up to preconceived notions of a particular ethnic group? And so I guess this question is really around, I guess, stereotypical views of or preconceived notions that, you know, that the media may give us when it comes to different groups, right? Like what's some best practices around avoiding that? Because a lot of that is kind of internal, right? And oftentimes you wouldn't see it until you see it. So
you're going to be really shocked by this answer, Shelton. Ask, ask and listen. You know, never make assumptions. When we talk about like celebrating Black History Month and we talk about, you know, celebrating holidays, that shouldn't be something that's done from the outside looking in. That needs to be something that that people are really interested in being part of and can speak to, you know, their own experiences. I think, yeah, it always comes back to being willing to listen and being willing to absorb what another person is telling you, and not live with your own unconscious biases and prejudices and your own lived experience, but allow them to guide that conversation or guide those events if you're going to have them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to mention this point as I mentioned a few times. Go out and educate yourself. It seems like a simple thing, but it's the absolute, I mean, in addition to listening, it's one of the best things you can do. Learn about somebody else. You don't even have to ask them, just go learn about what it is about this culture? Are these stereotypes right? Read books written by authors from that culture. Expand your horizons. That is the best way to learn about these stereotypes and how there might be the negative stereotypes in some cases.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to compile this next question. I've seen this a couple of times, right? You said go out and learn. Keep saying go out and learn. It's COVID. I can't go nowhere. I can't go nowhere.
You can. You absolutely can. I mean, there's so many great podcasts, publications, virtual events. In fact, in some ways, it's a little bit easier now because I don't have to fly somewhere to go to a conference. I can be a little bit more flexible in the things that I can be part of and attend. But even, you know, we have the internet. It's a pretty cool thing that we have. And I really enjoy reading publications. There's some Indigenous people publications that I read. There's The Root. There's, you know, whenever I start to think about titles, that's when they leave my brain. That's how that works. But it's available. It's out there. And in fact, you know, if you're sitting at home and you don't have a lot else to do, what a perfect time to pick up a book or to start listening to a new podcast from a point of view that you've never heard before, regardless of whether or not there's someone in your organization that matches that description. We can learn about the entire world. We have so much at our fingertips, even when we can't travel.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
I was just gonna say I'm a big fan of audiobooks. So get a few of those. Just keep listening while you're doing something else. One that was recommended to me recently, which I'm reading, is a book called The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. So if you're looking for another book to read through to understand maybe what the Black experience is like. I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with books from other cultures. I'm sure we can find those, but that's a book I recommend.
Love it. Yeah, Melinda, I got to come back to you. Any books you recommend? I know you said
my gosh,
the pressure is on. And
the pressure is on. Oh, let me look at my several bookshelves. There's so many. Honestly, you know, some of my focus right now is within my family. So I will say that, you know, if you asked me last year, I would have been able to rattle off a lot of titles. But right now you're going to hear a lot of, you know, The Out of Sync Child. And that's probably not entirely relevant to this conversation. But one thing that we have at Slalom that I really appreciate is we have specifically an anti-racism committee and group, and they have a reading list that's available to people. It's not just books, but it's also podcasts and other resources for people to go and educate themselves. And so I could certainly pull that up and just start reading titles, but those wouldn't necessarily all be things that I have already read. It's a long list, and I have a great appreciation for it.
Makes sense. I have a long list as well. That's why I'm not going to even have a long list of reading. Well, thank you all so much, both Cedric and Melinda. If you could do me a favor and please drop your LinkedIn profiles in the chat, that'd be great. I'm going to drop my LinkedIn profile as well in the chat. Please connect. As Emma mentioned earlier, so I run a nonprofit organization specifically that's focused on helping. There we go. Helping people of color get jobs in the tech industry. So if you're looking for a way to volunteer or give back, we do virtual sessions on the weekends. It's a great opportunity to get involved with local communities of color. And so I saw a couple of questions around what can I do? How can I get involved? I will type the website in the chat. And with that, again, thank you, Cedric and Melinda, and I'll turn it back over to Emma.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was such a great discussion. We had so many questions, so I'm sorry if yours didn't get answered to in time, but I'm sure that all three of our panelists, Shelton, Melinda, and Cedric, speaking for you, but I'm sure you would love people reach out to you, connect with you guys on LinkedIn. There's such a wealth of knowledge and resources, and we're just so thankful for each of you coming on and sharing just all of your great wisdom. So thank you so much again for all of you who joined live. This webinar was recorded, so that will get sent out to you if there's anything you missed or anything you want to go back and listen to again. I'm sure there is. And thank you so much. We'll see you all again on our next webinar coming soon.
Emma.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks, Emma.
everyone.
Bye.